I'm very honored to be the moderator for this panel. Unexpectedly, my internet has completely stopped working, so I'm using my mobile device, new mobile device to me. So forgive me for my lighting not being great, but I'd like to introduce my esteemed colleagues on this panel, and I'm going to go in alphabetical order. So Sheri Osborn's research focus is using data science strategies to predict unexpected consequences of automation on people, groups, and society, such as predicting a forthcoming digital divide caused by automation. Her prior experiences have been product and platform design and management. Sheri's hope for the future is that the internet becomes safe enough for people to utilize the abundance of content available, and that it can be personalized to every person's psyche and giftedness. So Sheri, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Karen Renaud is a Scottish computing scientist at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, working on aspects of human-centered security and privacy. She's particularly interested in accessibility of cybersecurity solutions. She collaborates with academics in 5 continents and incorporates findings and techniques from multiple disciplines in her research. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you.
Yvette Rentiera is the Chief Program Officer for Common Sense Media. She has spent most of her career in K-12 education and focused her current efforts supporting digital work where children can thrive through advocacy, research, education, and family engagement. Hi, Yvette.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And Dr. Roy Want is Senior Research Scientist in the Android team at Google and works on enabling compelling applications involving precise indoor location. The implications of his work are far-reaching, enabling emergency workers to find you in a burning building or guiding shoppers to a product in a large retail store. He has over 30 years experience in the area of mobile computing and is a fellow of the IEEE and ACM. Welcome, Roy.
Thank you very much, Amy.
Yes. So a little bit about my background. I've been helping people for over 10 years learn digital skills and in particular cybersecurity, mostly older adults, but also all digital newcomers. And I'm now a federal program officer for NTIA for the state of Missouri. And so one of the things that our panel discussed was that we wanted to make sure when we're thinking about this panel that when we mention internet for our panel, we're talking about internet that's used both by a wired broadband connection and also by mobile devices. So just all of the comments we're making apply to both use cases here. So I'm going to start with a large philosophical question, and we're just going to go down the line in the order that I introduced everybody, starting with Sheri. If you were in charge of all the technology in the world, and we all know there's no such role, but just pretend with me for a minute, what change would you make to create a safer internet for everyone?
Well, for the past year, Amy and I have been working with those across the digital divide and the very low-end users and all of the cookies and trackers and ads that randomly come up. The data transfer that's behind the scenes really makes the internet a frightening place for them. And so my change, if I could do anything, is to build a menu-driven system to bring the control of what actually happens behind the scenes to the forefront. So the user could pick and choose which information drifted off into the ethersphere. The user could control what kind of access any part of the internet has to their own computer, and that it would be more transparent and less mysterious of the data transfer when people simply just click on a URL.
Interesting. Great. Thank you. How about next, Karen? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I feel like we've been raising awareness for many years about the cyber problems, and we still find people who are not actually taking the precautions. And I think we've got to stop asking, why do they want to do it, and look at the barriers. And one of the barriers is accessibility. So you get a large number of people, so maybe they don't have high literacy, or they don't speak English very well, or they don't see very well, or don't hear very well. And these folks are at the moment, they're completely excluded. And I think we have to do more to improve accessibility of our cybersecurity solutions to accommodate everybody. So I've done a lot of work with dyslexics, And, if you give them a two-factor authentication mechanism where they have to replicate a 6-digit number, this is almost impossible for them to do within 30 seconds, right? And so and the capture is basically a death knell if you don't see very well. So we shouldn't be doing this because we're excluding large sectors of our society. And there's a huge graying population right now. And it's about time we accommodated their needs as well. So if I were in charge, which as you say, Amy, nobody is, I would start saying, the way we do in the physical world, where we put ramps and we make sure that folks are taken care of if they are not as physically able, we need to start looking at folks who cannot focus as well in the cyber realm. And there's a friend of mine called Lizzie Coles-Kemp down at Royal Holloway University. She termed something, she calls it the cyber divide, which I think is a very good term, where basically some of us can and others can't. And these folks are really vulnerable on the internet at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah, I love it. Cyber divide. Okay, excellent. All right, moving on to Yvette.
Yeah, so here at Common Sense Media, we really focus on kids and families. And it's really interesting because we know that our kids are really centered around internet and using it. And at the same time, decisions are being made with them at stake. And so one thing that I would do if I had all the control in this space is I would definitely ban surveillance advertising, knowing that any click, any link that people go on is building a profile to then provide advertising could be really dangerous and damaging for our kids, especially as we want to build curious learners and thinkers in a space where then a profile is being made for them to be really targeted for certain pieces of advertising that may be dangerous. And so I definitely think one of the really important things would be to ban surveillance advertising and really stick to advertising in the content and the websites that are there at hand.
Excellent. All right, Roy, how about you?
Well, I'm going to take the mobile internet perspective. And one of the things that I think is very important is that emergency responders can find you in a crisis. And obviously, this is something which I personally work on, but it's not at the accuracy that I would like. It's not available to the majority of the world. And it turns out that we've had the ability to find or to locate a person within about 1 meter for some, maybe about 10 years now. The standards have been in place through the IEEE for about 5 years, but that technology hasn't rolled out to the majority of the world. And, obviously, location is a double-edged sword, but when you're in a crisis and when it's important that you're found, perhaps because there's a fire or there's an earthquake and your building has partially collapsed, or perhaps, in this unfortunate time, there's an active shooter on your site and you're hiding in a closet somewhere, you would like the emergency services to be able to find you. And so with all the balances in place, that's what I would change. I would make sure that the world was designing and putting this technology into their wireless networks so that we could actually do this.
Excellent. Okay, so we welcome questions in the chat. And I'm going to move on to our question 2. Should we move levers of security and data privacy into the control of end users of technology? And if so, why? So we'll start again with Sheri.
I'm always going to land on the side of the client having the most control over their experience. That maps to the real world. I actually control everything going on my desk, unless my husband wanders in. And so I think the internet should mimic that. And I think that for a couple of reasons. First of all, people have their own preferences of how much safety they feel comfortable with. And so they should be able to set the safety of their system, their data privacy at the level they choose. But also from an educational perspective, you can't drive a car without knowing a certain amount of how to keep yourself safe. It's a big, complicated thing. Big things can go wrong. And I think if it did land in the lap of the client, then the user would be more educated about how to stay safe and what are the barriers, what are the problems they can encounter. So they'll be a more educated user and then become a more comfortable user and partake of more of the internet.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay, Karen.
Yeah, I have to agree with Sheri. I think that with the average person is actually quite good at figuring things out, and we should not disrespect them by thinking that big companies have to control what people see. And I think if you gave me control, for example, a lot of people get their YouTube videos taken down for using profanities. But some people, that doesn't bother some people, and maybe I should rather be given a tool that can say, okay, I want you to bleep out all the profanity so that I can just hear the other content. So that would respect me as an adult. Now, clearly with children, there's a different story, and we really need to protect them. But when a person is an adult, I think we need to say, you're an adult, you can handle what the internet throws at you. And I'm not talking about extremists and people who are saying that other people should be killed and that sort of thing. But I'm just saying the average discussion, we should be able to discuss the various topics without big tech deciding what we're allowed to listen to.
I love that statement that the average end user is pretty good at solving their own problems. And you see that over and over again, but I don't know that that's the narrative that we always talk about. So thanks for that perspective. Yvette?
Yeah, so I agree with Sheri and Karen as well. I think there's two big things here to address. And again, knowing kind of Common Sense Media focuses on kids, I think two big things is one, education is essential here. We see ourselves needing to introduce digital literacy and digital citizenship at a very early age. I have 6-year-old kids, and getting that and introducing them to that content early on so that they're aware of their digital footprint. They're aware that when they click on things, they're aware what is an advertisement, what is disinformation, misinformation. And it takes a lot of work to do that. So I do think education is key so that as we grow up, we're making solid choices that work for us. And then I think the other piece that I would say that's really important and valuable is the transparency of companies. So when we see the contracts, there are these very lengthy contracts and very fine print talking about what's transparent, what's privacy. And if we can make that information user friendly so that the everyday user can see that and understand, like, what does it mean to click on something, or what does it mean to have an advertisement pop up, I think we can make decisions that are safe and informative for whatever choices we make for ourselves. So I would definitely say the two pieces that are really important is education and then transparency from companies when we think about this.
More simplified user agreements. Everybody's in favor of that, I'm sure. Well, many, many people, most of us on this call. Okay, Roy.
So in my world, one of the main questions that comes up is, when do you share your location, right? So that's a pretty much a hot topic. I think we all enjoy the wide benefit of, for instance, opening up Google Maps and seeing which roads are crowded, which ones are flowing freely, where it's slowing down, where the dead spots are, so I can choose to perhaps go a different way or delay my travel. That's a real benefit, and I think everyone enjoys that capability. But in order to do that, there has to be some degree of location sharing all the time for all those people on the roads. That's the only way you can actually make that work, at least from a smartphone perspective. So anonymization, attribution obviously has to be protected, but privacy has to be protected. And there are other situations where your precise location for your phone is important. So for instance, if you are that person who's trapped in a burning building, you want the emergency workers to come to you directly. So there's different degrees of sharing. And of course, there are potential uses of location which we wouldn't want to use in general. So the question is, how do you actually make a rule which actually satisfies all of these things on the assumption that you want to do the right thing here in all cases? And that's I guess always been a big problem for the mobile phone companies as to what you expose to the user and when you actually make these choices for them, for instance, in the emergency situation. So I think this is a difficult one. The controls are there for you to use, but the question is, when do you automate some parts of that and when you don't? And it is a difficult question.
It's very difficult, and the risk-benefit analysis is interesting there, right? Because you want to be rescued in an emergency situation, and yet you may be in a relationship where you don't want someone tracking you in in a
Yeah.
domestic violence situation, and how you sort that out is really challenging.
Yes. I mean, and as another example, at some point when my daughters were younger but beginning to go out, it was agreed that they would share their location, and obviously there was some grumbling about that. It's understandable, but you have to explain. Well, it's a big bad world out there sometimes, and you never know. You might meet somebody that you're going to regret, and at least we'll know where you are. And so there's an example where you actually give up personal privacy for a very good reason. But then, then the other issue is, well, supposing you leave that feature on, are you then being tracked by your parents for, the rest of the week? So it's an interesting, it's an interesting
If I can
dilemma.
add on, I'll go back to me being in charge of all technology. I think the social contract would be stronger if I knew how long that information was going to be kept. I really don't like going to Google and finding out that in 2012, I was in Savannah for 4 days in 2020. And that I think most people aren't aware of, that and once you find out, you feel creeped upon. And so if I could have control over how long you get to keep the data, then that would make me a much more happy person of having my location on when I'm traveling, when I'm in the road, when I might be approaching danger.
Yeah. Agreed. Having worked with older adults, there were many of them that, just said, I don't want to opt into any of this. I don't want anything to do with this. And yet there were many benefits they could have derived. Okay. So moving on to question 3, where is the line between an individual's freedom to communicate the way they want to and the responsibility of companies to define what is safe? We've touched on this a little bit, but Sheri?
Well, AOL back in the day had a really good system that kind of mirrored society. I go congregate with whomever I choose. We say to each other whatever we choose. I call my mother on the phone. I say to her whatever I choose. And so I would say it's up to the individuals to be able to congregate with the communities that bring them value and joy, and that the communities themselves can self-moderate versus, let's say, a top-down moderation that would have people not able to communicate in a way that brings them joy, brings them value, brings them some sort of a desire to go back and communicate. And so in that case, I'd say there's very limited responsibility should be placed on the technology providers, in as much as my phone calls are private, my conversations are private, and I think that I should have the ability to connect with whomever I want and have a private conversation without burdening the technology companies with oversight.
Okay. Karen?
Yeah, I can totally agree with Sheri. I think that big companies currently apply a real sledgehammer approach in deciding what's safe for every single person. And that's impossible. We're all different. We're different ages. We're different perspectives on life. I think we should empower, especially parents. They're already there taking care of their kids and keeping them safe. So give them the tools to protect their children from what happens online. But for adults, I think just give us the power to choose. I think that, once again, when big companies do it, they sometimes get it wrong. And then there's a huge fuss trying to force them to see things our way. Let's rather let the end user decide.
Okay, Yvette?
Yeah, so I will say this one's an interesting question because I do feel like it's a bit of a balancing act here. Just in our recent research that we've been doing here at Common Sense, we've been looking at just youth mental health. We know that youth mental health crisis is increasing, and some of that comes from what their exposure is online. We've just completed a research around like access to, for example, pornography and what's out there, and the different information that's being sent. And so, I think that of course we want a society where we know we're all safe and protecting each other and having a healthy online experience. And at the same time, we want to make sure we have choices and that we can set those choices ourselves. So coming from the perspective of looking at our kids and definitely thinking about, yes, we want our families and parents to make those choices. And at the same time, many parents and families say they don't even know what their kids are seeing online. It really, truly, I feel like, is a balancing act there. And I think the big piece here for when you know, bringing the kids into this in this space is really having those conversations, and the value and the importance of families having those conversations, you know, having those conversations at schools to be able to hear, you know, are there situations where kids are experiencing harm or threats or anything else online that's making things unsafe? Because I would hope and feel that there is a community that wants to ensure safety online. And so it really is about that balancing act of safety choices, you know, protecting and honoring people's individuality, and also knowing that there's so many spaces people could go into that are unknowns.
Great, thank you. Roy?
Yes, so this is something that's been on my mind a lot, particularly through the pandemic period, where we've all been trying to, get the best medical information we can find. You go to the main media outlets. If you were very early on in the pandemic, we'd have all been advised that we don't need to wear masks, right? Despite it being a respiratory disease. And later on, of course, that was turned around. So, you know, how do you trust what you're reading? And even sometimes the experts get it wrong. A lot of effort has been put into fact checkers, right? There are certain platforms where people can have their own channels and give their own points of view. Often fact checkers are used to decide whether that should be removed from the platform or not. But then, you know, the question then is who checks the checkers, which is, you know, a really difficult problem. And the problem is partly is the scale of this. If it was a few articles, then you could have the best experts look at this. But often we find out that it's perhaps a journalist who's reviewing something which is in the scientific literature and doesn't really have the qualifications to make the judgment. So, so this is, I think, a huge problem. I mean, maybe it can be automated a little bit by AI. I know that's perhaps a little bit of a stretch, given the nuances in some of these articles. But it is a challenge, and I think in good faith, you know, some of the big companies have done a reasonable job. But as I think Karen said, you know, it's a sledgehammer approach often, because that's all that you've really got, given the scale of the information that you're having to deal with.
Interesting. Yeah, and you're just reminding me, for those of us who are old enough to be aware of this, that the FCC did used to have standards about when things were broadcast, for instance, the family hour. And, you know, our current situation, that sort of has been turned on with so many people streaming, with content being available online anytime, so many kids watching YouTube for hours and hours and hours. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but just you know, the world is a different place than it was, you know, 10 to 20 years ago. And so there's so much information out there, and where are the controls for the most vulnerable? All right. So our next question is, what has been the benefit of efforts to protect society from disinformation? And I'll start with you again, Sheri.
The pandemic has been, I think, a marvelous situation to really help society understand what the purpose of information, disinformation, misinformation is. I would have to say it's been a flurry of misinformation, information, disinformation, you know, throughout the past 2 years that I think was less helpful. But I'm an optimist in thinking that I think it's made society wiser. I think we as a society are going to take a stronger responsibility for where our information is derived, and we're going to be more thoughtful at the next thing that comes about, and not necessarily just fall in line because our favorite channel said to. So I'm optimistic for the future. I don't feel protected from disinformation in any way, shape, or form for the past 2 years. So I would say the efforts were not successful, but I think society is going to blossom, and the internet in itself will blossom in the future.
Great. Karen.
Yeah, it's almost as though Sheri looked inside my head and got my answer, because I totally agree with her. I was going to say there's been no benefits, because I also go back to the mask comment that Roy made. You know, first we were told, oh no, masks are not going to help. Then suddenly now you have to wear masks all over. And I think they broke our trust in the authorities. And so what's come out of the benefit for me has been do your own research. And don't just trust, as you say, some news reporter that says something, go and figure it out for yourself. That's a great benefit for all of us, really. A big wake-up call, I think.
Trust and verify. That familiar
Yes.
is there. Okay, Yvette.
Yeah, I've seen this trend with Sheri and Karen and our thinking as well around, you know, we are building more critical thinkers in this space. We are ensuring that, you know, we have to double check what we're doing, and we're putting that responsibility on the end user. And so double checking like what is out there. I think the other piece too that is really helpful to know is like we're also creating a more inclusive environment online by having this, by being able to like look at this misinformation, disinformation, and allowing more voices at the table, and maybe voices that weren't necessarily at that space with the different communities. So I do think it is providing an opportunity for just more critical thinking and also just more open space for inclusivity.
Excellent. Roy?
I think this issue of determining trust is an interesting one. It would be nice that if every piece of information that you clicked on had some sort of provenance, which would allow you to sort of trace it back to where it came from, as opposed to just an opinion. You know, some of the news aggregator websites that I look at, you know, the article is posted, perhaps there's a summary of it, and then a comment is made, and it could be upvoted or downvoted, right? And that's kind of an interesting one, because you know, sometimes there'll be a follow-up comment saying, please provide an additional link, you know, for your summary, and you can then you know, hopefully follow that and get some better idea where it came from. But the upvoting and downvoting sort of provides a community way of sort of judging whether this comment was a valuable one, something that contributed something, or whether actually it was fairly baseless. But the thing that worries me about some of these platforms is that they can become echo chambers for a certain community. And then, you know, the upvoting and downvoting is not balanced. It's clearly taken out of control. And obviously in those environments, if you joined in a naive way, you could be misled into a certain way of thinking. And I guess that's what we're all afraid of happening, is that, you know, with educated people and rational thought, you can make good choices. But if you somehow get into one of these communities and that's all that you see, and you just echo the thoughts of a small group, you can think that's the entire world. And I really don't know how we solve that one. So, you know, maybe one of the other panelists here has some ideas.
Yeah, it's very complex and layered, isn't it? Okay, our next question is, we've moved from a small number of news outlets to cable TV to mass media being delivered via the internet and social media. What is the responsibility of media and social media companies to ensure all sides of an issue are presented? We kind of touched on this a little bit, but Sheri?
I would say they have no responsibility. Media companies, technology companies, they answer to shareholders. And the shareholders and the executive team states the agenda and the direction that will keep the company healthy. What is good is that as through the pandemic, people have taken on more responsibility, more sources have shown up. There isn't just Twitter anymore. There's a plethora of Twitters. There's a lot more options, a lot more choices. And I just have to believe if you're going to be an adult and live in this world, you have to say, I'm responsible for getting the correct information, and I'm not going to hold anyone else responsible. Now, I'd personally like to see a channel where they said it's fair and balanced, and you get to see a reasonable argument on both sides or all the sides or something. But that doesn't exist. And so I think we as adults, not children, but we as adults have to do the work, not count on any channel, any media source, any technology company for the truth or the whole picture or the big picture. It's up to us. The information's out there.
Great. Karen?
I think that actually it's very difficult. So we have the BBC in the UK and we pay a license fee for them, and their charter requires them to be balanced. And every week somebody complains about them being unbalanced. So I think if anything's run by humans, humans are biased, then they're going to, even despite themselves, maybe favor one side of the argument. I think it's almost impossible to be balanced as a broadcaster, just based on what I've seen from a broadcaster that appears to try very hard to do it. And they still get criticized for not being balanced. So I would also say it's probably impossible. We have to go but the thing that we're all subject to is confirmation bias. So we're going to have to get out of our our comfort zone and go and look at other people speaking about a different perspective to make our minds up. So that's really the education we need to do. Don't just listen to one source.
Yeah, good advice. Yvette?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think there is a responsibility also to advocate for what our future looks like in this space. So, we have an advocacy group that's continually thinking and looking at what are the streaming channels, what's out there, and what is ensuring that we just had a question around hate speech and just disinformation and misinformation, and making sure we hold people accountable for putting true, and there's going to be bias for sure. That's just human nature, but we do need to make sure there is some clarity and some guardrails around hate speech and misinformation and disinformation. People will be making their choices on what streaming channel they'll look at and what online platform they will use. But at the end of the day, I do think we need to think about our kids in the future and what are we building and what are we ensuring is safe, so that choices will continue to be made. And we make sure that we stay away and we kind of detract from that misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech that sometimes kind of arises in certain spaces.
Roy?
I'd like to go back to the point that Yvette made at the beginning, which is education is sort of fundamentally important in this space. I guess the downside is that it takes a while for any changes in education to percolate through society so that we benefit from them. So there's some sort of gap there. But I would like to see a program where internet education was a key part of the weekly program that perhaps kids went through in the early informative years of school and through high school, understanding how to track down sources, how to verify. If you see an opinion, try to find, is there an opposing opinion? Is it justified? And so on. So I think some schools have such courses, right, or some classes, but I think they're a very small part of what they do, and we really need something which is much more of a national program to bring this, because it's become. I think the internet in some ways sort of came up from underneath, and we responded to it rather than planning, as with a lot of things. If you don't plan, then you don't always get a good result. And I think that's the problem. We're at a point now where everyone goes to the internet for information, but everyone doesn't have the tools to really judge what the source is that they're using and how to evaluate it.
Yeah, I would agree. And I've had conversations like this before where, I've heard from educators that it's very difficult with the increases in sort of technology education, just generally, that needs to be included in the Common Core, the curriculum, and then to add media literacy. Is there time to add to the general curriculum? But I think that all of us, for sure, on this panel, and probably many in the audience, agree that it's a really critical civic skill that we need in international society, and yet I'm sensitive to the issues of educators that there's no more room in the school day to add that as some of what I've heard before in very limited conversations. But it's a very interesting issue for sure. Our next question is, what is the responsibility of policymakers to ensure access to information for all while establishing standards to hold platforms responsible for the information that they post? And we're down to 10 minutes left, and we've got some great questions in the chat to get to as well. So, Sheri.
I'll go fast. I believe for at least America, policymakers and if technology companies get too cozy with policymakers, they're going to trip over our founding documents. And so there really isn't a place for, I think, policy here. I think people are free to congregate with whom they wish. I was around a bunch of longshoremen in Boston setting up a conference, and the language was nothing like I would ever hear. I was almost impressed at their ability to swear. But they're free to speak in the way that they communicate and work well together. And so I would say the farther policymakers stay away from it, except in the very most extreme cases, it would be better for society and the internet.
Mm-hmm. Karen.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say let the information be there and rather focus on accessibility, worldwide accessibility standards, to make sure that we don't exclude people who should have access to information because they have some sort of disability, or they don't have enough money to buy the best, latest equipment. We need to start. That's where the policymakers should engage, as far as I'm concerned.
Karen,
Mm-hmm.
I
People with disability. Yeah. Go ahead, Yvette.
I completely agree. I think accessibility is really important, especially right now, as like so much of our information is coming from the internet, whether it be accessibility because people cannot access it physically or monetarily. I think we need to really make sure that we think about digital inclusion in a way that is being able to offer all of the resources online to all people. And so that's really important.
Yeah, so thinking about these two terms, accessibility, which has to do with being able to see, hear, interact with the content, and availability, right? Is it available at a price point that a family can access? And a family with multiple children in the home and one or two parents trying to work needs enough available internet to be able to do that simultaneously. We, of course, see in the pandemic. So, Roy.
Yes, I mean, I'm completely supportive of all the comments that have been made so far. I think that accessibility to information, even if you perhaps don't agree with it, is extremely important. Maybe the way of dealing with it is to provide, if you like, commentary labels beside certain sources. I mean, you could imagine this could happen through the portals themselves. You don't censor the information, but you may provide some tag which says, there is some concern about this information, and here are some alternate links. That's one way of doing it. It's certainly the case that I would like all sort of general sources of information for education to be available. Some things are not, but I mean, these days you can get a pretty good, I would say almost degree level education by just looking around the internet and finding online courses which universities have posted. I mean, we've never been in a situation like that before, where somebody in a remote part of the world can access such detailed and accurate information, sometimes from the top universities. So this is also, the great side of this. We've focused a lot on some of the downsides, but the upside is that, what a time we're living in, where somebody could, get into, statistical analysis, who's, in a part of the world that doesn't have access to a general university, but has an internet connection.
That's true. It's wildly hopeful and optimistic. And interesting that you're bringing up the idea of consumer labeling, right? Like the Motion Picture Association of America before us that has, labels on movies, like the FCC implementing broadband labels so that consumers understand what they're purchasing. That would be a really interesting way to help and support consumers. All right, so I'm going to go to, this is a question that could have probably dominated the entire panel, so we'll do it very briefly. For the forthcoming election season, which we're in the midst of right now, right? Are we better off or worse off than we were 2 years ago? And what is the path forward with regards to information about elections? So Sheri, take it away.
I would say I'm thrilled we're in this place. I've been with the internet a long time, and this is a really interesting time. I would always say that more information is better than less information, and more information tends to be messier than less information. But I believe that good things are happening going forward. It's a scary time when you consider what's going on with the election in Brazil right now. But I think it's I think the right things will happen. I'm optimistic for the future that it's getting better.
Good. Karen.
I'm going to pass as a British citizen. I don't want to express an opinion. Thank you.
Fair. All right, Yvette.
Yeah, I feel like, when I get off this call, I'm going to be like, maybe I changed my mind. But no, I actually think it is getting better. And I think there's a couple of things. I think we're raising awareness on the importance of voting. We're raising awareness on making decisions and bringing about this conversation around like, what is the information? What is going to inform us? And, talking about misinformation and disinformation, if we're doing this well, we're providing people with the opportunities to see different sources, to hear different sides. What excites me most is seeing kind of the campaigns around and the energy around getting out to vote and making sure that people are coming out to vote with the amount and the abundance of information that we have at hand. And it will be up to our, voting citizens to say, hey, what are we choosing? Let me look at this information. But I do think we're in a good place because we do have so much information there. And so we're just hoping that information is accurate information is what's important that we need to continue to work on.
Absolutely. Okay, Roy.
Yeah, I guess I feel a certain amount of uncertainty about what's going to happen, and I don't know what people are reading, so it's very hard to actually understand where the country is as a whole. But the one thing I do think is important is that we have been through a couple of rounds of this already, and we've seen some of the scare tactics that go on. Hopefully, people are now alerted to this. They've got their spidey senses up and can sort of try and detect this when it is happening to them, and hopefully are then inspired to go and track down some of this information if they read it. So I think we're probably in a better place as well. I hope.
Excellent, and I feel the same. I really very much hopeful and optimistic. All right, we have a number of great questions in the chat, so I'm going to start off with those. Question 1, and Roy, for sure, I'm going to need your help on this one. In wireless access category, are you including cell service or just fixed wireless? These services are regulated differently, and I believe our intention was to include both, but I'll let you comment.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, they are different technologies, and as you say, something like a Wi-Fi network is regulated by the venue, and they decide the capabilities of that system. The protocols I was referring to for finding position relative to Wi-Fi were deliberately designed so that the phone is the only device which ends up with the information about where the phone is. And it's due to the nature of the way information is transferred between the two devices. So in other words, the infrastructure, so the building can't obtain that information unless the phone then provides that information for it. In other words, there has to be an additional component of this. So as an example, if you went into say a big box store and you use this technology to find out where you were in that store, the application, you may have an application there which has decided to share that information, but that's your choice. You ran that application. Now, as the comment said, the cellular industry is a different industry, and the mobile phone providers and the smartphone OSs are trying to ensure that your information stays with the phone. And the technologies which are associated with 5G allow more precise positioning, and there are various protocols which can be put into place. And so, the smartphone providers are trying to ensure that only those technologies are used which still maintain that the phone maintains its privacy. So that's the balance between the two. There are new technologies coming down the pike. We have to make sure that the rules which are in play right now continue to be applied in the future.
Excellent. And then you had a second question, Roy. Dr. Want, is the location capabilities tied to cell phone devices? I think you just clarified on that, but I just want to make sure that there's nothing else you want to say.
Yes. So to be very clear, the only way that you can do these precise measurements at the moment are, very precise. We're talking down to 1 meter, with Wi-Fi ranging, and the information which is determined by the phone stays with the phone, because that's the design of the protocol. Once the phone has it, then obviously the phone can choose. You can choose to share your location once you have it. So that's the nature of it. It's in your control. You have the ability to control where that information goes.
Got it. Thank you. Any other panelists want to comment on that?
Not me.
Okay. Next question. One thing is at the crux of implementation is the decision of opt-in versus opt-out. Opt-out is dangerous because so many users don't bother or can't interact with their operational software of their devices. Can we require a standard of opt-in and consistent user interfaces for users to better manage their own privacy? Sheri?
I think we've all said that it, in the hands of the users, very easy to use system to either be seen or not seen. I think it would be make the internet a more friendly place.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what anonymous attendee might be referring to is that software should be defaulted to the secure option, so that people don't have to bother to make the settings. It will always be most secure by default. So if there's opt-in and opt-out, and opt-in is the better security option, that should be the default. So if people choose not to engage with the settings, they get the secure option. But maybe if they know what they're doing and they want to opt out, they can still do that. That option is still there. And I'm not sure if that's what they're referring to, but I think that would be a really wise thing. And we've been arguing for that for some time in the cybersecurity area.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. Yvette, you want to add anything on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Karen. I would say one more thing, though, and add on around just the way we're communicating that opt-in and opt-out. We just had the conversation around accessibility, and we need to ensure when it comes to accessibility that communication is clear for all of our users.
Yeah. And Roy?
I don't have anything to add on this one.
Okay, perfect. All right, next question. The White House Office of Science and Technology Policy recently released the blueprint for AI Bill of Rights as a guide to prevent potential harm. Specifically for Roy, in what ways has Google complied with this?
I'm not familiar with that document, so I wouldn't like to answer this question until I was totally familiar. I'm sure there are people within Google who are very aware of it.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, for the rest of us, is this effort enough to keep consumers safe?
Are we speaking to safe from AI?
I don't know. And
I'm not familiar with the document.
All right. Well, so maybe if the questioner wants to clarify, I'll move on to the next question and we can try to circle back to that after question 5. Do you really think most people are capable of self-research? The amount of people that buy into conspiracies and misinformation makes it questionable if people are questionable people are critical thinkers able to determine real versus fake.
I have faith in mankind that if you don't have the skills to find the truth, or if you're not interested in finding the truth, I don't know what to do with that, except provide more education.
But education in terms of thinking critically. So teach people how to think rather than how to listen, to just accept what is said, to teach people to be critical.
And I would also add, and kind of going back, I feel like I'm saying this again, but just the accessibility and access to information. And when we talk about all different types of abilities, language, physical abilities, but making sure as we have that research, we're making it accessible for everybody to be able to make those choices.
Yeah, thanks for that point. And remembering that, for when you have a website, if it can automatically be translated to other languages on the screen, that improves the availability of information and the accessibility. So something we haven't touched on. So thanks for bringing that up. Roy, anything else on this one?
Just to reiterate my comment about labeling, I think having labels on information at least may alert people to the danger of some information. I mean, they still may choose to follow a very narrow view. Because obviously some groups do. But having the label, I think at least maybe it just spurs your interest in a way that you would follow up. And maybe if we can do that for enough people, then the world would evolve to this more critical thinking state.
Yeah, and I cannot look at the chat, so I don't know if we had a follow up to that question prior. So I don't know if any of my colleagues can see the chat, but I should say I can see the chat, but I risk not my audio going away, so I don't want to mess with my phone too much. Okay, let's move on to question 6. Would restoration of and/or extension of yellow journalism laws removed in the 1980s help resolve this issue?
Well, that gets back to the same. There's the fact checkers, but who checks the fact checkers, and who makes the decision at what is actually yellow? I believe it's kind of in the eye of the beholder, and therefore having this moved back into the hands of the client is about the only way to handle it, because it depends on people's perspectives. We do natural language processing, and we have annotators look at the text to see if they can agree on it, and they don't agree on what is hate speech. And so if we have annotators that are professionals at annotation disagreeing about the definitions of words, then the only systemic way to handle it is to move the preference back into the client side.
Okay. Karen?
No, I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Yvette?
Yeah, don't have anything to add myself.
Okay. Roy, anything else?
Well, just to say that, the fact checkers are clearly part of the equation, but maybe the fact checker's opinion can be given without actually removing the material. Maybe that's one way of dealing with it. So you expose the process, but you don't actually remove the final result. And then people can then judge and say, well, here this information has been evaluated. We see what the fact checkers recommend, but here's the information. You decide.
And that gets closer to the hearing, a fair, balanced description of an issue, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, circling back to question 4 about the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, the Blueprint for AI Bill of Rights. The question pertains to potential bias from AI. So Sheri, I know you've studied this. Well, you studied AI, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. The issue is that when it comes to code, you have to have something specific, and it can't be religious or preference or whatnot. So it's going to have to, it won't, if you have 6 people and they believe there's any number of genders, then AI can't be coded to say there is a gender bias or not, because there's no definition of genders. Then it will be up to the user to decide, in my belief of gender, there are 1, 2, 3, 10, whatever. And the same for, AI that pulls pictures. If 80% of the airline pilots are men, then statistically it would be correct for AI to pull a picture of a man in an advertisement. But that may look like gender bias because I would like to live in a world where a pilot is a man or a woman, in which case then it's a 50-50 proposition, but that's a different set of code. So I believe it, like all that, the code is going to evolve, but the more control the code can give the user to set up what they prefer, their worldview, I think then it will be very biased based on the worldview, but it will be accurate towards the worldview, or it would be just clearly based on the data out there, whether it's the number of pilots that are men, the number of nurses that are women, or something like that. But that is a definition that needs to be set so that it can be coded correctly. Unless you just have biased engineers that just like to write code and say, we think men rule the world, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks for that answer. Karen?
I think the problem is, once again, is that a lot of the stuff is the algorithms operate in a black box, and you don't know what is coming before for some sort of thing to get spat out. I think we need a bit more transparency in it. What is being fed into the algorithm and how is it deciding? And without that transparency, we don't know if it's biased or not.
Yvette?
Yeah, I agree. I agree too with Karen. I mean, we definitely need transparency, and we need to make sure, and coming from a focus on kids, we need to make sure we're not building these assumptions as they grow up and then set a stage like that. You're right, that all men are pilots, so we need to make sure that we're thinking about this for the future of our kids.
And Roy?
I think it's a difficult one. One of the issues with machine learning is the training sets. What training set do you provide? If the training set has bias in it, then obviously you're going to end up with a biased result. But the problem, I think most engineers have good intentions. The problem is that this is a really complex area. Supposing your training set just has a slight bias, would you even notice? How would you detect that? So this is the difficulty, I think, that face us. It's partly a complexity issue.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Okay, this probably is going to be our last question. So for Karen and Roy, would you recommend the implementation of GDPR provisions in other countries, and how can they benefit companies or businesses? So that's a general data, I forget this, general data privacy regulation, I think. Could be wrong.
So I'm not entirely sure it benefited companies. I think it was intended to benefit the man and woman in the street, so that companies take care of their information properly. And of course, we have data breaches, and these companies are then fined quite extensively. And so from my perspective, I think that is how it was intended. So of course, in other countries, everyone should be protected from companies selling their information on when they haven't given permission and that sort of thing. But I know that it was quite a nightmare for companies when it came in. Everyone was freaking out when the GDPR was enacted, and all of them suddenly had to, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? We're going to get fined. We're going to go under because of the fine. So yeah, I think it's more of a benefit. But obviously, I want other people to have the protections that EU citizens have.
Roy?
Yeah, yes, I agree. I mean, certainly, I'm sure it was a burden on some companies, but the net result is that I think many companies are now in line with this, and the net result is something which is quite positive. So so I think I agree with the statement.
Okay, well, Sheri and Yvette, I'd like to give you just a second if you have a final comment, but we're almost at time.
Mm-hmm. First of all, thank you for having me on this panel. I certainly enjoyed listening to these scary smart people, and I hope that I like being a part of the internet right now. It's just such a wonderful time. It's thrilling to me, and I am optimistic.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I appreciate that we brought such a diverse group of people with very different spaces that we made this a little more beautifully complex. So thanks for doing that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so much thanks to Marconi Society for this wonderful event. And I appreciate you all joining. We got through 7 of 8 of our questions. So we did pretty well. So thanks so much and stay tuned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.